On this Friday night, exclusive access to a new Canadian military mission. The Royal Canadian Navy navigates a highly disputed part of the world. The training involved.
One missile remaining inbound. Remain braced for shock.
Mackenzie Gray reports from the South China Sea. Ukraine's president calls this a crime against humanity. Russia's latest deadly assault, plus the rising attacks within Russia. Frightening flight. Heart-stopping moments after a passenger opened the exit door mid-air. Plus, trashy and proud.
Apparently, I'm just known as the dumpster diva.
When garbage and couture collide.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening to you. Thank you for joining us. Global News has been granted exclusive access to a new Canadian military mission in the highly contentious South China Sea, where China is growing its military presence. Beijing has long been pushing the boundaries in the area, one of the most important and fiercely disputed waterways in the world. It's even building and fortifying artificial islands to assert its dominance. Coveted and contested, the sea has been simmering with sovereignty disputes for some time. We'll get to why a little bit later in the newscast, but first to HMCS Montreal, right now sailing from Singapore into the South China Sea. Part of Operation Projection, with a goal of firming up peace and stability in the fragile region. Our Mackenzie Gray is traveling with the crew for more than a week, and he begins his coverage tonight, showing us what it's like on board. Mackenzie.
Farah, we've been granted exclusive access to HMCS Montreal as it sails through some of the most commercially important and politically sensitive areas of the world. With the brow lowered and the guns at the ready, HMCS Montreal set sail from Singapore, headed into the South China Sea.
We have to make a public and open statement and a clear display of our commitment to this international order.
That statement, Operation Projection, exercises and engagements throughout the Indo-Pacific to try and limit Chinese influence in the region. But to meet those objectives, the Montreal's crew needs the right fuel.
It's like a ballet.
Cue Jason Morgan, in charge of feeding approximately 240 people, oftentimes in uncooperative seas.
It's like an unorchestrated ballet to work in a galley.
Today's mission, cinnamon buns.
I tried it. I mimicked Cinnabons in Halifax. There's nothing better than those. I can't even come close.
But if those treats and 3 meals a day aren't enough...
Welcome. Petty Officer Whalen on board the Montreal warship. This is our convenience store.
Paul Whalen and his team have you covered for a reasonable price.
Candy's $1.75, chocolate bars are $1.75.
Providing small comforts from home onto the ship.
When there's time to relax, just to sit back and have a chocolate bar, a pop, and just to take time in and just think of loved ones back at home.
But finding that time can be tough. Among many tasks, exercises like this.
One missile remaining inbound. Remain braced for shock.
In today's simulation, the Montreal has come under attack by 2 other warships, causing fires, floods, and casualties.
Ship's company, unbrace. Rapid survey.
A successful drill that prepares the crew for the real thing.
It helps to create muscle memory for the ship's crew in the event that we were under attack.
Muscle memory on the deck and in the ring. A key part of Jean-Francois Martin's routine. He's a member of the ship's boxing club, which meets 3 times a week despite the sweltering heat.
A lot of people like to keep the training and then keep a good form and the physique and then the mental physique there up to a certain level while we're gone there.
Many members of the ship will have been gone for 6 months when they return to Halifax in October, but Farah will be with them for 10 days as we sail with the Montreal through the Indo-Pacific.
Looking forward to more of your coverage. Mackenzie Gray aboard HMCS Montreal. Thank you. Beijing says the South China Sea is part of its territory, but the region has been the focus of territorial disputes for several decades between various countries in the region. The Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam, and Taiwan have all claimed sovereignty over boundaries and islands throughout the area. But perhaps the most high-profile dispute has been over the Spratly Islands, a strategically located archipelago teeming with rich marine biodiversity and potentially unexplored oil reserves. A Russian missile attack targeted a Ukrainian medical center today. President Volodymyr Zelensky calls it a crime against humanity. At least 2 people died and 30 others were injured. And there are also reports of deadly strikes on the Russian-controlled areas of Ukraine and on Russia itself. As Redmond Shannon reports, the apparent ramp-up of activity comes ahead of Ukraine's highly anticipated counteroffensive.
Destruction and death 70 kilometers inside Ukrainian-held territory. A Russian missile striking a building that housed a psychology clinic and a veterinary practice. Drones again shot down over Kyiv. In Russian-held Ukraine, reports of deadly strikes too. Kremlin-backed authorities claiming that a woman was killed in the city of Donetsk and that US-made HIMARS rocket systems damaged buildings, including 2 hospitals. Inside Russia's borders, more apparent attacks, this time in Krasnodar, near Crimea, and again in Belgorod region, the area that saw Monday's brazen land incursion from Ukraine, with anti-Putin Russian groups claiming responsibility. A rising trend of strikes on Russian territory against military targets and symbolic places like the Kremlin earlier this month. The New York Times reported this week that US intelligence believes Kyiv was involved in that, despite its denials.
You're talking about that notion of hybrid warfare, which is to both have very real practical effects on Russia's capacity to maintain this invasion, but also to have psychological effects and political effects that could further weaken it.
Professor Scott Lucas says NATO allies are broadly supportive of these types of incursions to soften Russian defences ahead of Ukraine's expected counteroffensive.
It is quite clear that the Kremlin will try to turn the narrative of these attacks and say, look, we are the victim here. But I think that is priced into these attacks.
In Moscow, a Chinese envoy met with Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on a day when Brazil's President Lula da Silva spoke with Vladimir Putin. The so-called BRICS powers, China and Brazil, both want to help broker a peace deal that currently seems almost impossible. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Turning to Canadian politics in Alberta's provincial election on Monday. It's not just Albertans that are watching the race closely. Future residents are also very interested because the province needs to attract workers, especially in the community of Cold Lake in northeastern Alberta, because it is preparing for a boom. A major carbon capture and storage project is in the works, and if it's approved, Cold Lake will need thousands of construction workers in the coming years. And that's not all. As Heather Yourex-West reports, the Canadian Armed Forces Air Base there is beginning a major expansion as well.
They have been a familiar sight above Cold Lake, Alberta for decades, but the flight time for these CF-18 fighter jets will soon be coming to an end.
In January of this year, the government announced the purchase of the F-35 aircraft. It's quite a different airplane. In fact, they refer to it as an air vehicle more so than an aircraft. It's a flying computer.
Canada has been using the CF-18 since 1982, but much of the base here in Cold Lake is even older, dating back to 1954.
The first of the new F-35 jets will begin arriving in Cold Lake in 2026. But before that can happen, the base needs to prepare, and the construction needs are massive.
Construction is anticipated to take approximately 4 years here, but yes, we will have a lot of people moving here within the next year to start construction.
Ellis Dawn is currently recruiting hundreds of workers for the project, and in a tight labor market, the company has had to bring in people from as far away as Ontario.
We're expecting pretty significant numbers. So our housing is, there's room to develop, but it's a little bit tight right now.
The reality is, with this project and a major carbon capture and storage facility proposed for the area as well, the housing market in Cold Lake could heat up very fast. The city says it's planning for the change as best it can.
Watch your step, bud.
Not so easy when inflation is already hitting family budgets hard.
You obviously see it in the grocery bills and in the energy bills, but you're just more mindful when you're making those purchases.
It's why heading into Alberta's provincial election, affordability policies are top of mind. but the community has critical infrastructure needs too.
We always call it the Forgotten Highway, but it's really the main artery that comes up from Edmonton up to Cold Lake.
So far, the province has committed just $5 million towards improving the single-lane highway to Cold Lake. But post-election, the mayor hopes to see more invested here. With so much about to take off, this community is looking for all the help it can get. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Cold Lake, Alberta.
And Global Nationals hitting the road starting this weekend. Donna Friesen will be broadcasting from Edmonton on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Tune in for Decision Alberta coverage as voters cast their ballots in one of the most divisive provincial elections in years. To Montreal next, where a heritage building in the downtown core has erupted in flames. The fire broke out late yesterday afternoon in a former monastery that was built in 1846. 150 firefighters were dispatched to fight the flames. At least 2 people were injured and 27 displaced. The building is home to condos, a seniors' residence, a daycare, and one of the city's most prestigious concert halls. It also houses a pair of unique instruments, a harpsichord from 1772 and a Fazioli piano. The offices of Heritage Montreal are also located in the building. It has been a difficult year in Quebec, parts of that province still mopping up from severe spring flooding earlier this month. Water levels and major flooding that used to be seen once in 100 years has occurred in 3 of the last 6 years. As Mike Armstrong explains, climate change is forcing communities to prepare instead of react.
This is a neighborhood where sandbags are now one of the first signs of spring. This week means cleanup, but that wasn't always the case.
I never thought about it.
Flooding wasn't something Jocelyn St. Maurice says she ever worried about the first decade she lived on the water. Now, with an almost annual sandbag wall running through her property, it's hard to ignore.
I think that we should prepare every year for something like that.
This flooding season was rough. Levels went as high as in 2017 and almost as high as 2019. The difference was that people knew what was possible. There was a lot in those previous floods.
I moved about 300 bags.
That was unforgettable.
I'm tired. I'm wasted.
Now, what that experience meant this time is communities knew what had to be done, where there would be weak points. The borough of Ile-Bizard lost 1 home in this year's flooding.
It's not comparable.
But the mayor says in the last floods, they lost more than 50.
All these streets here, where we were sitting actually, they were in canoe. People were getting out of the street in canoe. So this year they were able to be by car.
Now, communities are having to change their strategies because of the frequency of flooding. It's safer to prepare and be ready than to wait and react.
We changed the definition of what is a 100-year flood.
Environment Canada senior climatologist David Phillips says we are seeing the new reality. It's not that there was never spring flooding before, it's always happened, just not this often. Climate change is making the factors that cause it more likely.
We're not changing the weather, except that we're making it bigger, badder, and more impactful.
So the water came up to over the first step.
Bert Ansell's now fought 3 floods. He lost his basement twice, but his landscaping changes kept it dry this time.
It's really making people realize what's going on.
For Ansell, climate change isn't about worrying about the worst that may happen, because the worst keeps happening. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
The shows won't go on. Coming up, why superstar Celine Dion is canceling her already rescheduled world tour. Mid-air panic on board a plane carrying 200 people after a man opened an exit door. Travelers were more than 200 meters above the ground en route to South Korea. Because the plane was landing, flight attendants couldn't stop the 30-year-old, who witnesses say also tried to jump out. He was arrested upon landing and then confessed to the crime. The motive still unclear. Around 12 people suffered minor breathing-related injuries from the incident. 9 of them were sent to hospital. In Sierra Leone's capital, people are shattered after a living symbol of the city's history came crashing down in a heavy storm. The The 70-meter-tall cotton tree is believed to be around 400 years old, the oldest of its kind in the West African nation. When the first freed slaves arrived in what was later called Freetown, they offered prayers at the tree. And as time went on, Freetown expanded around the tree, seen as a symbol of freedom and the heart of the city. Sierra Leone's president has pledged to put something in its place to honor the West African nation's history. Celine Dion has canceled all her scheduled world tour dates through next April. Every night in my dreams. 42 European shows have been canceled, including stops in France, Norway, and Ireland. The Quebec superstar is struggling with a rare neurological disorder that causes muscle spasms. It affects her ability to walk and to sing. Dion apologized to her fans, saying, "I'm so sorry to disappoint all of you once again." The 55-year-old says she hopes to be back on stage again one day. The tickets are being refunded. Swapping cocktails for mocktails. Ahead, who's fueling a new sober surge? With sunny skies and warmer weather, patio season has arrived for much of our country. That usually means enjoying a cold beer or maybe a glass of wine. Yet a new trend suggests more Canadians are choosing to take an alcoholiday, switching out their spirits for zero-proof beverages. For the new reality this week, Sophie Louis looks at the growing sober curiosity movement and the younger generation driving it. Sophie.
It was practically a rite of passage for teens and 20-somethings to experiment with alcohol and sometimes indulge just a little too much. Well, now research shows Gen Z is drinking 20% less than millennials, who in turn are drinking less than Gen Xers and baby boomers. But that doesn't mean they've stopped partying.
Elizabeth Gascoigne is the founder of Absence of Proof. She organizes booze-free events in a number of U.S. cities where people can socialize without the alcohol. They still serve beer, wine, and cocktails, all of it zero proof.
I would say the majority of the people that come to our parties probably identify somewhere on the sober curious spectrum. And what that means is they are intentional about their drinking, but they're not completely sober.
And there's been a surge of non-alcoholic products on the market, many of them Canadian.
This is from Quebec. This is when I talk about those Quebec breweries that were first onto market producing world-class product. This is one of them.
At the Drive Canteen, a cool and curated convenience store in Vancouver, non-alc drinks are their best-selling category.
Initially, we started with a much smaller selection, and we realized that there was a great community, and so we wanted to expand upon that.
The trend is in line with recent recommendations from the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction to limit alcohol to 2 drinks a week. But sober curiosity is definitely generational.
I would say the harder people to convince of the concept are folks that are a little bit older and maybe do have that notion of like, well, are you in recovery? Or I don't want to be sober. I don't want to be associated with that. But Gen Z is like, yeah, I don't really feel like drinking. And they're much more open to the concept of sober curiosity.
And there are so many made in Canada aspects to the sober curiosity movement. We'll introduce you to a successful BC winemaker who switched sides, shall we say. Now he's taking the alcohol out of his wine altogether. And I even had a chance to have a sample of it. Find out how that goes on The New Reality. Farah?
Thanks, Sophie. And as Sophie mentioned, you can learn more about this alcohol-free trend on The New Reality Saturday on Global. Fashions fade, style is eternal, especially sustainable style. Next, the surprising source of these designer threads. Now to the Canadian designer turning trash into fashion. Patina Bondar is weaving her magic using garbage, yep, literally garbage, to create garments that are absolutely glamorous. Her clothing, both durable and chic, is now on display at a new exhibition in Toronto. As Mike Drolet explains, it's amazing what you can do with plastic waste.
What an odd name for an exhibit, Refuse. We certainly weren't refused entry to Patina Bondar's first solo show, which features clothes that are total garbage.
Thank you. As long as they're not too trashy.
That's right. It's pronounced refuse because everything here had a previous life in a trash bin. So garbage? You're darn right it is.
I think we're very quick to dismiss things as garbage. And my goal here is to kind of show the most extreme transition of this material.
So this bustier with its woven patterns was once trash bags.
Yeah, it's one of the most intricate things I've ever made.
And you'd likely guess nylon was woven into this glamorous piece in lieu of the plastic and wrapping paper it's actually made from.
It's soft, it's comfortable.
Plastic waste, as you may have guessed, is a big issue for Padina. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch is twice the size of Texas, and despite many countries banning single-use plastics, it's not getting any smaller. And it's no secret, per capita, Canada is one of the most wasteful countries on earth. Less than 1/10 of plastic waste Canadians produce is recycled, leaving more than 3 million tons to end up in landfill. So where most of us see waste, Padina sees, well, garbage, of course, but also potential.
I'm not the most fun house guest because I actually do care, and I look at people's garbage all the time, and I'm like, hey, like, you can use that in like a few more times. You can like wash that and reuse it.
And what she creates wouldn't look out of place at the famous yet avant-garde Met Gala in New York. That, she says, would be a dream. Until that glorious day, Padina will continue to work on her craft, making clothes and jewelry, diving for supplies.
Apparently, I'm just known as the dumpster diva.
And keeping her eyes open for treasure that was once someone else's trash. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
And that's Global National for this Friday night. I'm Farah Nasser, and on behalf of our whole crew, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is the waterfront in Sydney, Nova Scotia, with the world's largest fiddle in the background. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.